Michael Caine is one of the most beloved actors in history. From Alfie to Alfred, his career has spanned 8 decades, and he's racked up more accolades than we can count. But Hollywood's most charming Cockney has a surprisingly dark history. He's been locked in a cupboard for a weekend, strapped to a bed for days, and experienced a very unusual dinner date with Peter O'Toole, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. The death of his mother devastated him, until he discovered she'd been lying to everyone in the family. It was only then that he found out about her heartbreaking secret. Today we'll take a look at the extraordinary life of Michael Caine. The world welcomed Michael Caine, or as he was known as then, Maurice Joseph Micklewhite Jr., on March 14th, 1933. As you might have guessed it, he was born in London, specifically St. Olave's Hospital in Rotherhithe. His working class parents did everything they could to give their son a good life, but they often had to resort to desperate measures. Being born in London in the early 1930s had its downsides. I bet some of you can see where this is going. Though he was too young to join the fight when World War II broke out, the conflict upended Caine's entire life. Caine's home, like so many others, was destroyed in the Blitz. When World War II ended, his father returned home, and the government set them up in a prefabricated house in the Elephant and Castle. It was supposed to be a temporary thing, but the family ended up living there for 18 years. Caine wasn't too upset about it though. He'd lived in tiny apartments that didn't even have toilets. The prefab did just nicely. Plus, he would leave his humble beginnings behind before long. Before he could begin his life in earnest, Michael Caine had to do his part for his country. As part of his national service, Caine joined the Royal Fusiliers, eventually seeing active service in Korea. There, he witnessed the horrors of combat firsthand, and it changed him forever. As a youth, Michael Caine held communist sympathies, understandable given his working class upbringing. However, that all changed when he went to Korea. He saw how North Korea and China treated their citizens, and it horrified him. Any sympathies dried up before he left Korea. That, coupled with his experiences in live combat, meant he returned to England a changed man. But little did he realize the worst horror was waiting for him back home. Caine and the other men in his platoon returned to England, but one by one they started not feeling well. Soon, each of them was hanging on for their lives, Caine included. They had contracted cerebral malaria, and the disease ravaged their bodies. If Caine and his other servicemen expected hospitable treatment from their home country, they were in for a rude awakening. Caine found himself in the care of an American named Colonel Solomons, a man who has clearly never heard the phrase, "first do no harm." No one knew much about cerebral malaria back then, and Solomons was determined to change that by any means necessary. Rather than treating Caine and his comrades, Solomons used them for a chilling experiment. Colonel Solomons had Caine and the rest of his platoon all strapped to beds. Then he just left them there. With nothing other than regular injections to keep them calm, Caine and the others were kept tied to their beds for 11 days. Caine claims he barely survived the ordeal, but finally they loosened his restraints, his illness broke, and he was free to go. However, the experience had a profound effect on him. Caine returned to acting with a newfound appreciation for life. When it comes to adopting a stage name, keep it simple. Maurice Micklewhite became Michael White. With this new moniker, he landed a role in Wuthering Heights, playing a drunkard, of course. Still in his early 20s, White was making strides in his professional life, and in his love life too. While working with the Lowestoft repertory company, Caine caught the eye of one of those pretty girls he dreamed about when he was a teen. Her name was Patricia Haynes, and they quickly fell madly in love as only young people can. Before long, they tied the knot, and they'd set about building a life together. But it would all fall apart before long. Caine's career started off strong. He landed a bunch of roles and a wife before he was 22. But after that, things started to fizzle. The normally chipper actor later described his first 9 years in show business as really, really brutal. More like purgatory than paradise. It also didn't help that, wouldn't you know it, there was already a Michael White performing on the London stage. Maurice needed yet another new name, and it didn't take him long to find it. Michael White got the call from his agent, telling him he needed to find a new name from a phone booth in Leicester Square. Distraught, he looked out across the street, and his eyes fell upon the nearby Odeon Cinema. And what movie was showing that day? The Caine Mutiny. The rest, as they say, is history. By the late 1950s, Caine had been around long enough to make plenty of connection in London's theatre scene. He moved in with another young Cockney actor, Terence Stamp. He and Stamp went out for roles together by day and drank away their struggles by night. Pretty soon, they came across another young actor, one who was a little more established than they. His name was Peter O'Toole, and he got Michael Caine into all kinds of trouble. In 1959, Caine became O'Toole's understudy in a play called The Long and the Short and the Tall. It was a valuable experience, and the pair of them became close, but Caine didn't quite know what he was in for. He was no slouch, but O'Toole made drinking an Olympic sport. One Saturday night after a performance, O'Toole invited Caine to dinner. Michael Caine had never been to a party like this before. Peter O'Toole liked to keep dinner simple: a plate of fries and a bottle of brandy. Caine sat down to tuck in with his new friend, and the next thing he knew, he was waking up in a strange apartment. He was fully clothed, and when he looked over, O'Toole was in bed with him. He looked at the clock and couldn't believe his eyes. 5 p.m. They'd slept away the entire day. For a moment, he had worried he was going to miss a performance, until he remembered they didn't have shows on Sundays. Except there was one problem. Soon after Caine woke up from his fries and spirit stupor, a strange young woman walked into the room and informed them that it was in fact Monday. 2 full days had passed since they'd sat down to dinner, and they had a performance starting across town in a matter of hours. The pair frantically cleaned up and rushed to the Royal Court Theatre, barely making it in time. But it wasn't a complete loss. O'Toole left Caine with some sage wisdom that night. Caine was no stranger to the drink, but this was a whole new ballgame. 2 days up in smoke. O'Toole, on the other hand, took it like a hardened soldier. He had one piece of advice for his understudy: never ask what you did. It's better not to know. He's probably right about that one. Michael Caine isn't some romantic, tortured artist who constantly got in his own way. Though he and his friends drank all the time, Caine always knew when to hang it up. At least, he did when Peter O'Toole wasn't around. He'd lived through World War II, seen service, and survived being strapped to a bed for nearly 2 weeks. He wasn't about to throw his life away over a good time. Remember how Caine had a wife? Well, in case you couldn't tell from the stories about benders or the fact that I haven't mentioned her much, the marriage didn't exactly end in happily ever after. The two separated a few years after they wed, then divorced in the early 60s. Caine wasn't too beaten up about it though. Throughout the 60s, he had a string of scandalous romances that kept him plenty busy. From Natalie Wood to Bianca Jagger, with a bunch of models in between, Michael Caine became quite the playboy in the swinging 60s. But his love life wasn't the only thing that was on the upswing. Though we all love his Cockney accent now, it really hurt Michael Caine's career in the beginning. London was still seriously divided along class lines, and there just weren't as many working class roles. God forbid a guy who talked like Michael Caine play anyone important. It took an outsider to finally give him the chance he was looking for. Once Caine landed his role in the 1964 film Zulu, his career suddenly started to take off. But he was lucky to get the part. He played an upper-class officer in the film. But Caine had been sure he'd never get the job with his working-class roots. But he was in luck. The American director Cy Enfield thought all Brits sounded the same anyways and cast him. The experience would once again change Michael Caine's life forever. But it wasn't all fun and games. The film was shot in South Africa, and what Caine witnessed on set shook him to the core. Much of the crew for Zulu were local South Africans, and the country still existed under apartheid. Almost instantly, Caine was horrified to learn how the black crew members were treated by their white supervisors. Caine personally witnessed one foreman punch a black laborer in the face over a minor issue. Thankfully, producer Stanley Baker witnessed it as well, and he immediately fired the foreman. But there was only so much they could do. Caine vowed to never make a movie in South Africa as long as apartheid existed, and he stuck to that. Michael Caine had eked out a living as an actor for a decade, but he never actually had any formal acting training. As he put it, "My acting lessons was watching people on the tube and on buses. It's body language." When it came to playing the upper-class officer in Zulu, he copied Prince Philip's body language to a T. Unfortunately, this approach almost had disastrous consequences. When execs at Paramount saw the first shots from Zulu, they immediately sent a telegram to the set. "Fire actor playing Bromhead. Caine doesn't know what to do with his hands." Apparently those execs hadn't seen Prince Philip before. Who knows where Caine would be today had the director listened to them, but thankfully he didn't. Even without a contract, Caine's performance in Zulu put him on the map. But if you watch those early performances, you might notice something a little odd about him. Caine proved he could play an aristocrat in Zulu, and his following roles were more of the same. But since he was playing upper-class gentlemen, Caine used the standard received pronunciation that most actors used rather than his iconic Cockney accent. But it was the 1960s, and with the Beatles' classic Liverpudlian drawl taking the world by storm, received pronunciation started to wane. Audiences wanted British accents with a little more character. And you know which accent has a lot of character? That's right, Michael Caine's. Just 2 years after Zulu, Michael Caine landed the role that made him a movie star. 1966's Alfie. With his Cockney accent on full display, the movie was a runaway success. American audiences ate up Caine's lovable, self-centered playboy. He even got an Academy Award nomination out of it. 3 years later, he yelled, "You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off" in The Italian Job, and that was it. Michael Caine was a movie star, but he had plenty of bad decisions ahead of him before he became a legend. Today, Sir Michael Caine is recognized as one of the greatest screen actors in history. But if you'd have told that to audiences in the 1970s, they'd have laughed you out the door. Sure, he had Alfie and The Italian Job under his belt, but those weren't exactly prestige pictures. Throughout the next decade, he averaged 2 movies a year, and most of them were atrocious. Maybe there are some secret Beyond the Poseidon Adventure fans out there, but I haven't met one. Caine's 70s oeuvre leaves a lot to be desired, sure, but let's cut the guy a break. He wasn't too focused on his career, because, once again, he'd fallen in love. Before Tinder, there was watching TV? Okay, maybe that wouldn't work for most of us, but dating is just easier when you're a movie star. In the early 70s, Caine saw a gorgeous woman in a commercial for Maxwell House. He wanted to meet her, and wouldn't you know it, a friend of his knew her. Her name was Shakira Bash, and she remains the love of his life to this day. But while it was love at first sight for Caine, we can't say the same thing about Shakira. To Shakira's credit, if a strange man calls you and says, "I saw you on TV and I have to meet you," you should probably hang up the phone. Caine rang her up, and she rebuked him. So he called her again the next day, and the next, and the next. Finally, after 10 straight days of calls, Shakira finally agreed to meet with him. And before any of you guys out there start thinking that this will work, ask yourself this. Do you sound like Michael Caine? If not, I probably wouldn't try it. Caine married Shakira in 1973, and she finally made him cut back on the pints. Going out on weekend-long benders with Peter O'Toole hadn't exactly been healthy for his last marriage, and Caine was determined to make this one work. To this day, he still only drinks a bit of wine with dinner, nothing more. Michael Caine was on the fast track to the B-list during the 1970s, but he finally started getting a little choosier with his roles in the 80s. He won his first Academy Award for playing Elliot in Woody Allen's Hannah and Her Sisters. Soon after that, he teamed up with Steve Martin in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, delighting audiences and getting a Golden Globe nom for his troubles. Now that's more like it. Finally, Michael Caine was giving real performances in great movies. Though, between those two films, he kinda did appear in one of the worst movies ever. Michael Caine's mother was maybe the biggest influence on his life. She was tough as nails, and she instilled that hard edge on her son. She taught him to hold grudges, and she taught him well. Though normally an affable man, if you cross Michael Caine, he won't forget it. 3 people have wronged me in my life. I froze each of them out of my life, and I never forgot nor forgave them. If any of you know who these 3 people are, let me know in the comments because I would love to know. When Ellen Frances Marie passed in 1989, Caine took the loss hard. In the weeks after this tragedy, however, Caine's grief transformed into a profound sense of betrayal. He discovered that his mother had been lying to everyone in the family, even her husband and children. It was only after her death that he found out about her heartbreaking secret. Michael Caine knew he had a younger brother, Stanley, but what he didn't know is that he also had an older half-brother, David. His mother had David before meeting Caine's father, but there's a disturbing reason why they never met. Early in life, doctors diagnosed David with severe epilepsy, and in those days, treatment options were basically non-existent. So Ellen had to make a devastating choice. Ellen put David in a mental institution, where he lived for his entire life. She never told a soul about the boy, not even her own family. After Caine discovered this shocking secret, he visited his brother and did his best to make him comfortable. Sadly, David passed away only 18 months after meeting his famous long-lost brother. Later in his autobiography, he wrote, "There was nothing Ma wouldn't do for her boys." But perhaps that was also because there was one boy she hadn't been able to do much for. As we reflect on his remarkable life, we're reminded that true strength lies not only in success, but also in our capacity to confront the past with courage and understanding. Michael Caine continued through the 2000s and to this day playing iconic character after iconic character, and has cemented his status as a screen legend. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, leave a like, consider subscribing, and we'll see you next time.